Okay. Think that's working. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Let's see. All right. Well, this is a good test. Ah, it seems to be working. Okay. Sorry for the feedback. Just had to make sure this is working. Okay. So this is the first time Called to Defend is officially live streaming. It's not exactly a happy-go-lucky one. This is something that we're gonna do probably a little more often. Obviously, this is not scripted. I'm doing this live, and my thoughts are not all the way gathered. Generally, these are gonna open a little more positively. I usually like to make a kind of lighthearted comment about just what we're going to talk about. I know Monday is the start of this series, the official start, but I didn't want this video to come out later, just because I think the topic that needs to be discussed here is something that just happened, and it's particularly relevant to right now, I guess. So yesterday, a man shot up a Catholic school, killed 2 children, and I believe 2 parishioners at this moment. I think 17 other children were injured. We don't have all of the details quite yet, but we do actually have quite a bit on the shooter. And I was watching the news story about it, and they were showing a video that he had made before he went and did this horrible, awful, depraved act. And it was very clear from the video that he was very angry at God and very much hated God. He had put on some of the bullet magazines, "Where is your God now?" And specifically, he went and he shot the children in the church while they were praying, which was intentional, I believe, as a message, right? The message, "Where is your God now?" Right? You're praying to him, and then I kill you. So where is your God now? And the answer to that question is, in fact, closer than he's ever been, right? In moments of tragedy like this, in moments of evil, God is close. God is present. Right? We know from the book of Isaiah that he is the wonderful counselor. He is the Prince of Peace. So God is not lost in these moments. And I think that is so critical to remember. And I wanted to kind of start with that, that these acts of evil, these moments of evil that seem like God should have stopped, does not mean God is absent, does not mean God is not real. If we do not think for a second that God is more grieved than anyone by these acts of evil, then frankly, we don't understand who God is, and we don't understand the pain and the wounds that God incurs upon our death, right? Because God never intended for death to be a part of our existence. It was only human action that did that. So I guess what I'm getting at, I suppose, is the motivation here, right? The idea of God being absent in the midst of a tragedy, and for this man to do what he did shows really shows a lot, I guess, about identity and about the kind of thought that transgenderism leads to, which is, of course, the ultimate rejection of God. Right? Transgenderism as an idea tells God that he made a mistake, tells God that he is not in authority and in control, and tells God that the way that he created is flawed, when in fact it is transgenderism that is the flaw, right? And I don't want to get to the point where we as Christians forget that these are people made in the image of God, right? As many things as I would like to say about the individual that did this, certainly things that should not be said on this channel or really in any other channel, but they are words that come to mind. We're not going to pretend that they don't. The things that I want to say would not be indicative of the life that we are called to lead as Christians. It doesn't mean they aren't justified thoughts. It doesn't mean that when we think thoughts of justice and we think thoughts of harm to the individual that did this, it doesn't mean that's not righteous anger. However, we must also recall that these are people made in the image of God. And they are afflicted by this ideology that has corrupted them deeply and has, in many senses, convinced them of the great lie of Satan, which is that we are gods and we know better than God. And at its core, at its heart, it is demonic. I do not mean to call these people evil, at least not any more than any sinner is evil. Any one of us does evil. What I do mean is that the ideology which possesses them is fundamentally and fully evil. And it is demonic to the core. So I guess why these thoughts came to me within the past couple days is I saw somebody making this point, and I thought they were almost right. They almost had it right. But they were trying to sort of analyze it from a political perspective. And I don't think that's right. I think that's where people can get it wrong. This is no longer a matter of politics. This is not a matter of we need harsher gun control or we need, to ban transgenderism. Whatever you may think the solution is, there is but one solution, ultimately, and that is Christ. So to look at this thing that people have struggled with, this idea of God making a mistake, of God being wrong, and that we are God, to look at that from 21st century political issues is to entirely miss the point of what happened here. What happened here was the biting of the apple. What happened here was the fall of man. playing out once again. And the reason I say that specifically in this instance is this young man clearly had some demonic influence in his life. You can go and watch the videos. But there was one moment in particular where the young man had showed off his guns, and then it cuts to him with a target, right? A target in the shape of a human being, clearly that he had made. And at the top of that target was a picture of Christ in the middle of the Passion. It was a head. It was the head of Christ, crown of thorns on him, blood coming down. It was in black and white. And the quote underneath it read, he paid the debt that we owe because we owed a debt that we couldn't pay. Right. So this idea of sacrifice. And the young man from behind the camera laughs at it. And I mean, like, laughs. Like, he doesn't speak any words through it. He just has this short, like, if there's no other word for it, demonic laugh. It wasn't like the deep guttural voice that we all think of for the demonic. Instead, it was this pained laugh. Like, it hurt to laugh at it, but he couldn't help it. And that to me was everything. That told me everything right there of what happened here. I'm not going to say he was possessed. I don't know if he was or not. Although part of me hopes that he was, and that human beings could not reach to this level of evil and hatred of God, but I know that they can. So part of me wants to say that he was, but part of me also understands that the heart is evil above all things and no one can know it. But the other part of me, like I said, knows that the evil exists so deeply in humanity. But part of me wants to know that he wasn't possessed. And that's a strange thing to say, I realize. But I want to know that he was not possessed. Because then I know that human agency is responsible, and therefore this can be cured with Christ. And that's not to say that obviously possession is not cured with Christ. It is done by Christ alone. But when somebody is relieved of possession, their life doesn't necessarily change. Right? They can be exorcised of the demon, and they may go on living how they were before they got possessed. Doesn't always happen, usually doesn't happen, but it can happen. What's the difference here, I guess, is when a person, even so evil and depraved, comes to Christ, there is change. There is true repentance because they have found the identity that they were missing. And if this man, even though he did these awful, evil things, could have encountered the love of Christ before he did them and been saved and been repented, and had repented, then we know the power of God could have changed this. Now, perhaps he wasn't, right? Perhaps he was never presented with that overwhelming, unashamed, unapologetic love, the agape love of God. He may never have encountered that. But if he did, it's hard to see how he could have carried out what he carried out. And so that, in my mind, is the demonic influence, the ability to keep somebody from truly feeling the love of God. And this is something that I've encountered with a few people recently. that they have fallen into this trap, this belief that God cannot love them, that they are too far gone, that they are too depraved, they are too deep into their own ideology and their own identity and all of the sins that they've done, that God will not save them. And that is a demonic idea. Not to call them demonic, but that it is an idea straight from the demons. It's. I think it was Michael Knowles who put it the way. Perhaps he's quoting somebody, I don't know, but who said the way the devil works is he will tell you that this sin is no big deal. It's no big deal if you bite that apple. It's no big deal if you look at that photo. It's no big deal if you drink one more beer. And then as soon as you do it, the devil turns around and says, how could you do that? That's so evil. You are so unworthy. You are so depraved and lost and forgotten. You are too far gone. And I think in large part, that's what happened here. I think in large part, this young man believed that he was too far gone. And you can see that in a lot of, he wrote a lot of words on his guns, and you can see that in a lot of the writings. You can see just virulent hatred pouring out from all of these writings. And he kept a journal, and in that journal, he was calling himself sick. He asked the question, who am I? Right? Who am I? He didn't know who he was. He thought he was just too far gone. And so he said, he said that he wanted to take his own life, but that he wanted to take others with him, essentially. He said that it wasn't good enough for him to just take his own life. He had to do something spectacular. Right? This sort of nihilistic idea that the only thing worth doing in life is suicide. And that's something that I reference it a lot. The Sorrows of Young Werther somewhat talks about in the abstract. It doesn't say it directly, but it's the idea that since Werther no longer has his love, life isn't worth living. There is but one action worth living, right? It's nihilism. And I think you have to hit that point of nihilism in order to affirm transgenderism. And the reason that I say that is because if nothing matters, then your gender does not matter. Your sex does not matter. Who God made you to be does not matter. And so you see this path from nihilism to transgenderism to eventually what the infusion of what this man did. To not only does nothing matter, but paradoxically, the only thing that I can do that does matter is to take lives with me. And he specifically made it a point to say that it needed to be the most defenseless lives, with children. Right? He needed to go out and he needed to kill children. And because he had this idea of nothing matters and who God made me to be does not matter, and I don't even know who I am. Remember, he put "who am I" at the top of the page of his notebook. He then had to go and do something that was an affront to God, to prove that he won, right? To prove he found something that mattered, that God could not control him in, and that he had complete and total free reign over. And that idea is demonic. That is the ultimate goal of Satan, to take as many people with him as possible straight to hell. And to do something that is an affront to God, to take the creation in God's image, corrupt it, and take it with him, in a sense of the only thing that Satan can do that matters. The only way that he can hurt God is to destroy us. And the only way that we as human beings can hurt God is to accept this demonic lie, right? That we are gods and that nothing matters. And that is quintessentially transgenderism, that we are gods and nothing matters. Right? There is no definition of man, there is no definition of woman, nothing matters. If we accept the idea of transgenderism, that sex does not matter, that gender does not matter, that life itself does not matter, right? Because sex is the building blocks of life. It is. We create life through sex. Sex is a characteristic determined at the moment of conception. Adam did not have true, complete, full life without Eve. There was not a helper to be found for him. They complete one another. They are one flesh together. Sex is the core component to life. So if we disregard that and say sex does not matter, then we say that life does not matter. And when we say that life does not matter, we get moments like this, where because life does not matter, the only thing that you can do is to take it. The only thing that you can truly do in life that matters is take it. Right? That's the ideology. I'm not saying that's correct. Obviously, that's not correct. Because we as Christians believe that things matter. Things do matter. Things have a telos. They have a purpose. Sex has a telos, right? It connects us to God. It makes us complete in that we can create like God creates. And we create life. That's a beautiful, wonderful thing, and that matters. It's somewhat of what Solomon gets at in Ecclesiastes. That this idea that all of these things that he's pursued and all these things that he's done are vanity. They are vanity. They do not matter. The only thing that matters is, as he closes the book, to eat, to drink, and to serve the Lord. That's it. Because all of these other things fade away. All of these other things leave. All of these other things eventually become nothing. And when you reach the end of your life, the only thing that matters is, did you serve God? But transgenderism, and by extension the demonic, or really the demonic and by extension transgenderism, as I believe transgenderism is a product of the demonic, not that the people are, the ideology is. There's a big difference there. Sorry, I just kind of lost my train of thought there. Oh my goodness, I apologize. Right, so if nothing matters, and we subvert all of sex, and we go back on what God has ordained for us, and this lie from the demonic, if we accept that, then we have failed to live out a godly purpose, and we have failed in truly loving our brothers and sisters, and we have failed in loving the stranger. I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that we need to have sympathy for the people who are affected by this, and we need to completely and utterly have no sympathy for the ideology itself. And that's difficult to do. That's very difficult to do. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that it's easy. It's not. You cannot have tolerance for the ideology. The ideology is from the demonic. Right? It rejects God outright. It says that God made a mistake. God does not make mistakes. God put you in the body, and he gave you the sex that you have for a reason. There is a purpose. There is a telos to it. If we deny that, then we deny God. It's why Deuteronomy 22 and 23 talk about both transvestitism and, in a sense, transgenderism. And specifically Deuteronomy 23:1, that someone with crushed stones, as they call it, as the euphemism is, cannot enter the tabernacle of God. That's not to say that somebody who has had an unfortunate experience, not of their own doing, is not welcome in the church. The idea behind it there is that somebody who has mutilated themselves in an act of pagan worship, because pagan worship is just worship of the self, that person is not welcome in the church. And that is a very difficult thing to do. That's a very difficult thing to say, but it's because they are living out a lifestyle that has deep-rooted demonic corruption, and they need to be saved, and they need to repent of that lifestyle before they can be welcomed into the church. That does not mean that you can't have a trans person, or trans-identifying person, I should say, come to your church. You absolutely should. That's how they're going to be saved. But if they're living in that ideology, you ought to tell them, I love you. Right now, the path that you're going down is destructive. It is just going to end in misery and death, and it's going to be a painful death. And you are going to spend eternity separated from God, and I do not want that for you. I am not doing this to control you. I get no control out of this. I personally get nothing out of this except for a brother or sister in Christ. That's what I get. And I would love that. But I am most concerned for your well-being, because I love you, because I am called to love you. I am commanded by my Lord to love you, and thus I love you. So that we have to say that. We have to differentiate between the demonic ideology and the lost person, right? The 100th sheep. We have to go and be the hands and feet of Christ. We have to be the ones willing to welcome that 100th sheep in and say, now that you are here, 100th sheep, you are not going to live like you did outside of the flock, outside of the pasture, outside of the fence, right? You are going to live in accordance with the purpose of the shepherd, which is to provide. You're going to provide. You are going to live in accordance with the rules. And we do that because if we go outside the paddock, if we go outside the fence, there are wolves, and they will come and tear us to pieces. And that's a real risk. That's a real warning that we should be giving to these people, because they are so lost and so hurt. They are constantly asking that question of, who am I? They are seeking for identity. We can provide them the means to find that identity, right? We can point them to the Word of God. We can point them to worship. We can point them to prayer. We can point them to Christ. It should be our goal to, at every point, refute the demonic. It should be our goal to, at every point, counter evil where we find it. We should counter this ideology. We should be vehemently opposed to it, but we should do so in a kind and loving way. We should fight the demonic. We should take up every argument, and we should demolish strongholds. And we should, as is the theme verse of this channel, we should follow 1 Peter 3:15 and be prepared to give a defense for the hope that we have. We must do that in a loving way. And that can be a very difficult thing. That is a very difficult thing. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say it's easy. But it is important that we do that, because of this fundamental lie that goes to the very core of our being, the very essence of who we are. Right? God formed us in our mother's wombs to be who we are. And we are not the opposite sex. If you are a man, you are not a woman. If you were born male, you are not female. If you were born female, you are not male. There is no in between. There is no changing. There is no mutability within that. Who you are is who God made you to be. And I'm not talking about how you feel. How you feel is not who you are. There are some times when I feel like $1,000,000. I would love to have $1,000,000, but who I am in that moment is not how I feel in that moment. Because who you are does not change without God. Right? Without God, you are once a sinner, always a sinner. With God, you are once a sinner, now you are saved. You were once foreign, now you are welcomed in. You were once a lost sheep, now you are found. Who you are does not change without God, and it certainly does not physically change who you are. It does not spiritually change, or it does spiritually change. It does not mentally change who you are. It spiritually changes who you are. You were dead, now you are alive. And that's another aspect, right? Dead and alive, that the person I was watching hit on, and I think he did a great job of it. He talked about how transgenderism is so demonic that it worships death. Well, he didn't go that far, but I'm going to go that far, right? He talked about transgenderism in itself worships death because it says, I am putting to death the person that God made me to be, and instead I am going to be this person that I made me to be. Right? I am going to become God. And evidence of that is if you call a trans-identifying person by their birth name and not the name that they've chosen, they will say, don't dead name me. That term in itself gives away the game. Because now you are saying, I have put to death that old person. And here I am new. Right? Rather than God, who puts to death the sinner, in a sense, right? He puts to death the sinful ways. And that person that we were dies and is raised, just as we do in baptism, right? We put the old self down and come up with the new self. Right? Just as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5. Transgenderism says, I put to death, I am the one who puts to death the old person and becomes a new person. It is the desire to be God. And the desire to be God stems from the demonic. That was the great lie of Satan in the garden, was God's not in control. He just doesn't want you to be like him. If you eat from that tree, you will be like him. And that is the ultimate lie, that we can be God. Right? We can, in a very, very limited sense, be like God, in the sense that we are his image, in the sense that we can create. Right? I have a daughter. That is my image. Right? My daughter, God bless her, looks a lot like me. That is something that she's going to have to work through. No, I'm kidding. But that is something that God has blessed us with, the ability to create like he created and like he continues to create. Of course, God is still involved in that creation process because we do not understand how life begins. And this is something that I get at in another rant, so I won't go into it now. But God is still involved in that creation process, but he uses us to do it. And that is the way that we are his image. But the idea that we are gods is a corruption of that. The idea that we have control like God has control is a corruption of who God made us to be. And for transgenderism, it is in my opinion, the epitome of that. The other one that I think could qualify for that would be abortion, and I'll do one of these on that sometime. Right, the idea that we control who lives and dies, that should not be our decision. At least not in terms of innocent human beings. That's not our role to play. But that's neither here nor there. Transgenderism, in my mind, is the epitome of the fall. The idea that God is not in control. I am going to be the one who puts to death and brings to life. I am the one who creates, just like God creates. I am the one who determines, just like God determines. And in particular, with this shooter, that was very, very apparent. If I can kind of bring it all together and have it all circle around. That was very, very apparent because he took his own life at the end of it. So not only does he put to death the man that he was born as and wants to bring to life himself as a woman, not only that, but he also decides when he dies. Right? To reference it again, Ecclesiastes says it is not for a man to have authority over the day of his death. The idea then that this young man had, I believe he was 17, so quite young, is that he was God. He was God. He would determine when he lived, when he died. He would determine his identity, even though he didn't know who he was. He would be the one in control. And you saw that in a lot of his writings, of his statements against Jews, against Muslims, against God, right, against everybody he could think of. He had some political messages in there. He had the ideas of both the left and the right, right, in terms of politics. It was not a political thing. It wasn't. And to treat it as such is to miss the point. Transgenderism in itself is not a political issue. It's a moral issue. It's a spiritual issue. The politics just happens to follow. Right? There's this debate whether culture is downstream of politics or politics is downstream of culture. I don't think either is necessarily true. And this is thinking that I've reformed on. Not reformed as in like, Reformed Baptist. Like I've thought about more and changed my position on, and I think it's overall a better position. Neither is true. They are all downstream of the spiritual. And they are just as much downstream of each other. If we do not get the spiritual right, then we do not have politics. We do not have culture. We are simply in spiritual chaos. We are in the midst of spiritual warfare. And the politics and the culture follow the spiritual. A great example of this is the book of Hosea. I have just finished up studying Hosea for the last about 2.5 years-ish. And one of the things I turned it into a commentary verse by verse. And one of the passages that I remember reading and reflecting on the most was about how the leadership had failed Israel. And I think even in that commentary, I had written that culture is downstream of politics, or at the very least that it was a circle. missing my own realization later on, obviously, that it is all a result of the spiritual. And given that it is a result of the spiritual, it's very obvious now, I guess, given that it's a result of the spiritual, because the nations, the nation of Israel, had fallen into pagan worship. And because of that, the leadership failed. Because of that, the country as a whole, the nation as a whole, had fallen into debauchery and sin and just the most disgusting things you can think of. Because there is a spiritual reality behind everything, everything follows the spiritual. This man's actions, this young man's actions, followed the spiritual. He had a drawing of himself looking into the mirror, and looking back at him was this horrible monstrosity, this demon. It was a demon. It was a demon looking back at him. He had drawn it, him looking into the mirror, and a demon looking back at him. And it was this awful, awful, visceral image. And it's that consultation with the evil spiritual side of things, with the demonic, that in itself was another one of the, I guess, indicators of the exact spiritual realities that were happening here. Clearly he was influenced by the demonic, because you cannot do this sort of thing without the demonic influence. Not to say that he did not have control over pulling that trigger. Absolutely he did. Absolutely he did. Even if he was possessed, if you want to say he was possessed, which maybe he was, you cannot have possession without inviting those spiritual forces in. He was the one in control. But he had demonic influence. He had this awful, awful, awful ideology flowing into him. On that page that he had drawn this horrible demonic image looking back at him, he had written something in, I think it was Russian. And the instructions there were to take his own life. I guess it was supposed to be, from what I was able to interpret from his manic writings, it seemed like it was the demon instructing him to take his own life. And I think, obviously he listened because he took his own life. But I think that was something that also stood out to me in terms of the demonic influence that he was under, and the ideas that he had flowing through his head. The spiritual reality he was under was a demonic one. And we know that the demons absolutely are real spiritual beings because of moments like this. The human mind, as depraved and evil as it is, does not come across these ideas alone. It does not come across the idea that we can be God. We determine what innocents live and die. That is a demonic idea. To be like God in that sense is an idea of the demons. And I think that's kind of the point I'm getting at, is the reason that this case epitomizes all of transgenderism and the demonic influence that it has is because it so clearly indicates the spiritual reality of the demonic, of what the demonic says and what the demonic believes, and what it then inspires in us. So how do we deal with that? We're going to go through that next time. I've been streaming for about 45 minutes now. I think that's probably a good stopping point. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you to everyone who's watching this later. If you want to see more live streams, please feel free to let us know. You can do that in the live chat. You can do that in the comments once this is posted. You can also just let us know on various other videos or on our social media posts. But please be thinking about these things. Next time, we're going to look at scripture that talks about transgenderism. I referenced some of it, but not all of it. We're going to go a little more in depth. We're going to be thinking about these things a little more. And then in terms of just how the demonic influences our society and why transgenderism in itself is false, and how we can know that, how we can know from scripture exactly what we're dealing with and what to say. So again, thank you all so much for watching. I pray that the Lord blesses you and keeps you, makes his face to shine upon you, and Lord willing, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.